Joining us today, the Emmy Award-winning former host of The Daily Show. He's also the writer and director of the new movie Irresistible, which is out June 26th. Jon Stewart is here. Jon, welcome to Pod Save America.
Hello, John. Thank you for having me, and thank you for spelling your first name correctly. I think that's,
Hate those H's. Hate the H's.
We were so poor growing up, we couldn't afford one, but it's always nice to see a fellow John.
So you have emerged into our current political hellscape with a film. It is
dumb.
It's about
a raging inferno, and I'm in the corner like, anybody want Fresca? Very refreshing.
It's great. I watched it this weekend. It's about a mayor's race in rural Wisconsin that becomes nationalized when this small town is invaded by a bunch of super PACs and DC
Yes.
consultants.
Yes.
So I will say you really captured the dickishness of the consultant class quite well. To what extent do you hold what you've called the industrial political complex responsible for the absolute shit show that we're living through right now?
It's certainly not that. There's the reality of the world is it is a complicated place where divisions are real. I think where I hold it responsible to some extent is that I see it as an incredibly valuable tool that could be utilized to our benefit. And it's unfortunately too often gets tangled up to our regret. And maybe that's what it is. I certainly don't view it as, if this whole problem would be fixed, if only the media wouldn't, generate clickbait. It's not that. I view it as kind of, and always have, kind of like an immune system. And in a time like this, literally a pandemic, we need all the tools to fight ills that we can get. And I've always been a firm believer in that system. I think what I believe is that, like any system that makes money, it tends to propagate the parts of itself that make it the most money and grow. It's like, so if you own a football team, right? And you start out and you're playing like 12 games and it's fine and you're making good money and the guys are getting paid. Well, now it gets a little more popular and the TV comes and you're like, I have an idea. Let's do 14 games. And you know what else would be really cool? Wild card. Let's throw a wild card in there. And then that goes for a while and you're like, I think 16 games makes a lot more sense. And why don't we add 10 teams? And why don't we have a longer play? And maybe 18 games. And the players are like, this hurts our brains, right? Like the more we do this, the more our brains die. And the owner's like, I totally get that. That's very cool. 17 games. What about 17? Systems that are incentivized for how they make money tend to just, and especially with Citizens United, the political industrial complex has grown. When Eisenhower said, beware the military industrial complex, I don't think what he was saying is that, war profiteering and all that is the cause of war, but it makes slowing conflict down that much more difficult.
Yeah.
And I think and by the way, the billions of dollars in our electoral system is the least of its corrosive effect, because that's not factoring in how that money changes the way people govern and the amount of time that they have to spend raising money that could be spent and the incentives in their careers to maintain accessibility to those that they think will keep them in power and keep the status quo. So it ripples through the entire system.
I mean, you mentioned Citizens United. It's like, obviously, a constitutional amendment or a new Supreme Court would be the ideal way to start fixing this. Short of that, it seems like, the best we can do right now is maybe a system where you have more candidates like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, who, are funding their campaigns with small donations only. Seen other down ballot candidates do this too. And then, of course, you have like Republicans doing exactly what they're doing right now still. Do you think that would still make a difference if we just had more candidates sort of deciding to swear off big dollar donations?
Well, sure. I mean, but again, it's sort of an unfortunate situation that, swearing off big influence is considered like a bold move against the system. Like, that's sad that a system is built that way. I think what I would love to see is to not make the system permanent. Like, don't make it 7-Eleven where it's always open and we're in a constant campaign scenario. At this point, I think quarantining it would actually be maybe a better move for us. There's no other country in the world that I know of that engages in the permanent campaign like we do.
Yeah.
That it's just electioneering and the powers that be, and it's all working together. We've set up the system. And by the way, the pandemic kind of blew out what would have been an incredibly tedious past few months, where the narrative that would have been set up is Sanders against Biden, and will the Bernie bros forgive, and will they and you notice that without it, it's kind of fine. Like,
totally
we're
fine.
we're not less informed because they haven't fully embraced like a runaway narrative that doesn't really exist and didn't hammer it into the ground. There's certainly vestiges of it, but the point being, when you create a permanent campaign, like expanding football, like, it's there to continue to make money, and it's going to keep pouring money into this system. And so it's not going to end, but they don't realize that the effect of it is we never get a chance to take off the uniforms. So we remain enemies all year long. Talk radio, 24-hour networks, constant barrages of things. It entrenches those divisions, and it is not incentivized to ever fix them. Because if you start to problem solve, your moneymaker diminishes.
Right.
So we're stuck in a place, what I find that's always shocking in the world that you inhabited with some of the political stuff is there's no accountability, like, at all. They still call in Bob Shrum and go, what do you think? And you're like, did that guy ever win in a life? Like, what are we doing?
There's always a green room waiting for you somewhere.
Always. And so it's musical chairs. And when the music stops, nobody ever takes away a chair. And so everybody is, I used to say at the Daily Show, we'd be sitting in the writer's room, I go, just remember, when we leave here, the only friends you will have are in this room. Because we tried very hard not to become a part of a complex. Now, we were parasitic. We were still making money off of that carcass. But the attempt was to filter to be some of that immune system, to be some of that filter.
I mean, we talked a little bit about sort of fixing it on the political side with too much money in politics. Where do you even begin on the media side? Because I feel like, since you've left the Daily Show, the media has more than proven your point that the entire business model, the punditry, the conflict obsession, the algorithms, like, none of it is designed to give us the information we need to make educated political decisions. How do you start to change not just individual behavior, but the entire incentive structure?
Well, so it's a generational project. The right has done a really impressive job over a 60-year period. They got to a point where they thought, you know what? The institutions in America that people rely on for clarity and for authority are not comporting to our point of view. There's too much the best and the brightest going on, and not enough love it or leave it. We would very much like some more love it or leave it. So for 60 years, what they decided to do was, we will build an alternative structure. We will build our, you know what? Academic institutions are rotted to the core with liberalism. We will build our own academic institutions. Think tanks are rotted to the core with liberalism. We will bring our own think tanks. We will bring our own media. And this was a conscious strategy. Some of it real, because they thought a point of view needed to be served. Some of it cynical, in that part of the design of the project was to discredit the institutions that so they were comporting. It's like they do this today. You know, sure, we have Limbaugh, but you have NPR. And you're like, they are not even in the same universe of activism. They used to say to us all the time, The Daily Show, what's your responsibility to the, you know, Donald Trump is your fault because you made fun of Republicans for so long. They got tired of it. I'm always being asked to be introspective about my impact on the discourse. I have never seen any moment of introspection from the right-wing media and the right-wing institutions that were built that corroded the authority purposefully of maybe liberal leaning, but certainly not activist. And to that extent, you know, did we make fun of conservative causes? Yeah, I'm sure we did. But for 60 years, if you have an AM radio, 24 hours a day, they preach Democrats as enemies.
Oh, yeah.
In no uncertain terms. They are raising a generation to feel as though those people are enemies. And it blows my mind that they play victim to this day. But disassembling that, you're not going to. You're not going to be able to, you know, look, even in this moment, how hard is the right working to make sure they're seen as the victims of this moment of racial injustice? What's the real tragedy of this moment? We might lose a statue or two, which are on the cusp of having slaves. Or the liberal mob will come for you and call you a racist. If you're more concerned in this moment about the language police, I mean, and by the way,
it's grievance. It's pure grievance. That's all they got.
And it's bullshit. Look, I get it for Trump. What's he going to run on? His record? Come on. But talk to Mitt Romney about cancel culture. There's a pretend amongst the right, and I can't tell how much of it is cynical and how much of it is religion. And when I say religion, I don't mean Christian religion. I mean the religion of the right, that has them give no introspection to, you know, Eric Trump in the middle of a pandemic in Tulsa, the site of one of the worst massacres in United States history of Black people in 1921, the day after Juneteenth, was railing about, we're going to finally be able to say Merry Christmas again. Merry Christmas. The phrase in the English language that is said maybe more than any other phrase other than with cheese. Like, what are we doing? And yet we still pay attention to them. So my feeling is we've got to stop reacting to this nonsense, because it's nonsense, and start building a culture that earns that editorial authority back from the audience. that isn't just responding to the moment of what they've done. Right now, it's purely reactive.
It is. I mean, I think about this a lot. We think about this here at Crooked Media. Like, how do you build sort of a progressive counterweight to what they have? And what's always on my mind is, and you've talked about this a lot, like, how do you get beyond the endless political warfare, that sort of permanent campaign you're talking about, where we're always divided against each other, with the version of the Republican Party we've had for the last few decades? Like, I don't like spending my time like freaking out about what a lunatic Donald Trump is, reacting to his bullshit. I would love to have like honest, thoughtful disagreements with Republican politicians on this show. I can't really find them. And I think that they know that they benefit from the cynicism that's generated by all the partisan conflict. So they keep luring us into it. Like, how do we break that cycle?
So what I truly believe is you disconnect from it. So the business, look, you're also producing content. And the production of content, one of the main things that it has to be is sustainable. And when you produce content at the rate that it's being produced, right now the news media has taken on the circadian rhythms of Twitter as though that's the heartbeat of what news is. It's sort of like mistaking the Dow Jones Industrial Average for our economy. It's one of the more superficial indicators of it, and Twitter is one of the more superficial and volatile indicators of news. Yeah. But that's what the news reacts to now. And if you go now and you watch the news, they're just trolling Twitter, picking out what's trending, and then coming out, and nobody's stopping, but they're picking it out. We've let the right dictate the terms. And they've dictated a terms of conduct that they don't abide. They don't abide by all this nonsense about freedom of speech, like they're defenders of freedom of speech. How dare the left mob is coming for you, and they're going to call you a racist because they hate America and they won't stop till you're silenced. So I can take a knee at a football game. Leave the country. Okay, happy holidays. Damn you, atheist. Like, it's completely and utterly full of shit. And they won't accept any kind of, introspection on it. They just hit that hobby horse that they're the real victims here, that they're the ones. The left polices language and polices conduct, but they don't. They're all for freedom, really. Tucker Carlson called the Nike Colin Kaepernick ad as an attack on America. And that if we let it go, it will be the end of this country. Like, so you have two, they're the slippery slope people. If we allow this to occur, what's next? They'll topple this statue. Okay. It's a statue. They'll call you a racist. Okay. It's like in the Black Lives Matter movement, it's all about the slippery slope. Well, okay, let's play out your slippery slope. So if you get to the bottom of that slope, what is your life? Are people now following you in stores? Making it harder for you to get a mortgage? Maybe redlining your neighborhood so that the value of it goes down? In other words, their worst case scenario is still better than how many people are living right now in this country. But they portray.
And by the way, for all the free speech complaints, they have, a couple of the biggest megaphones in the country to blather on every day.
They're trying to censor us, and you can check me out on my podcast, Muzzled. And you can then go to our website at youwon'tstopme.com, and also I'll be on Hannity. It's nonsense. But they have to play the victim because they don't have another card to play. So my advice is, do not buy into the paradigm. Don't talk about I want to set up a progressive network, say I want to think about setting up a network that understands the difference between corruption and clarity and integrity. Because that's what will improve things. I tend to think that progressive politics are more on the side of integrity, but that doesn't mean you have to be willing to know when the people you believe in are also corrupt.
Right.
And you will gain credibility by pursuing that with the same intensity that they are pursuing victimhood.
I mean, you told the New York Times last week that one of the things you hope people take away from Irresistible is that participation in this corrupt system is inherently a corrupting process. So one of my biggest concerns over the last several years is that this younger generation, which I think is overwhelmingly progressive in its values and its activism, will look at electoral politics, rightly sometimes, and say, you know, if this is such an inherently corrupting process, why even bother participating? How would you answer that?
So the process is designed to keep you out. It's designed to be exclusionary. And that's what's corrupt about it. So the answer to that corruption is not to reject that system, but to take it over. To insinuate your values into it and change it from the inside. That's where we will begin the process of, you know, when I was in Washington trying to lobby for legislation, I was stunned by the cluelessness on the right and the left of how their insular system looks so cancerous on the outside. You know, we went down to this hearing, and it was a subcommittee, but within that subcommittee hearing, there's supposed to be 14 members, I think. 12 of them were marked present, but there were never more than like 4 or 5 of them in the room. And I was trying to figure out, like, A, why is no one here? And B, why does it count that they're here? So in that hearing, if you come in for a minute, you're counted. And then you can leave.
Oh, yeah.
That's what Jim Jordan and Louis Gohmert did. They came and they sat down for a minute, and then they left before hearing anybody.
They got to go make a Fox hit, probably.
So they've got to, what? Help their brand.
Yeah.
Because this is a business now. And it's money, and it's branding, and it's all those other things. So Louis Alvarez, who ends up passing away 2 weeks after testifying, and who that night, his liver shuts down and he ends up in hospice, gives this incredibly powerful, moving plea to no one. 4 or 5 people. And when I point that out, the head of the committee, a Democrat, maybe it wasn't the head of the committee, pushes back. Steve Cohen, I think, and says, you know, I take exception to that. You know, members are very busy. Now, I'm sitting next to a man who is literally dying and who's come down with oxygen tanks and all kinds of things because he was invited to make his plea, not for himself, because he knows this is the end, but for his brothers and sisters and cops and firefighters and other people suffering this. And you have the balls to say, hey, man, our time's very valuable here, so you can't expect us to be in the room. And in that moment, you realize they are fucking lost.
Yeah.
Because A, part of why you're so fucking busy is because you got to raise so much money and do your hits, and you scheduled 8 meetings when you should, like, then don't schedule it. If only a legislative body could get together and make the rules more manageable so that members could actually attend hearings that they think are being called. Like, that's the part. It's incredibly isolated and insular in Washington. And the one thing that does give me hope is you're seeing at the grassroots level people coming up, not as organized, like the right's very good about, they've organized their activism. You go to work for the right they've got a feeder system and there's money there.
Yeah.
You want to go work for them, there's money and there's a system in place. Minor leagues are there. You can play single A, double A. They'll move you up to triple A at Regent University. And before you know it, you're on the Supreme Court. Like, they've got a whole feeder system. They've built this parallel universe and now they're running people through it to create the pillars of power that they need to put in place. The left is getting somewhat wise to that, but what I'm seeing from them is a real, authentic, grassroots, fuck this, I'm going to run. And it may be a little more chaotic and harder to wrangle, but I love it.
Yeah. You can't manufacture the energy. So the fact that the energy is there is the most important part of the whole thing.
Right.
You've said that the enemy is noise and the goal is clarity, which I love. Who in the media or politics or anywhere in public life do you look to for clarity these days?
Well, I mean, I think that, so I don't look to any individual for that. I look to individual works. An article I'll read or an analysis that I'll see, things along those lines. And there are certainly really incredibly talented people that bring things to the fore, but it can come from anywhere. The problem isn't that there aren't talented, smart, and people that are not cynical, that are idealistic in the media. The problem is the weight of the noise. Like, we just need, it's bigger than individuals. We need systemic filtering. And that only occurs from a left. It's like when you need government action on certain issues that just won't be effective as individual action. And which is why the right is so successful at it. They work systemically. Fox News works systemically. Now, admittedly, like, you almost feel bad for them now, because for 8 years you could almost have pretended that there was a principled opposition to Barack Obama. And now that Donald Trump is in, the contortion, I mean, it's like watching some sort of, pathological Cirque du Soleil to watch them now justify executive power or ego or anything that he does. Morality, immorality, rule of law. He's the rule of law guy who just fired the head prosecutor at Southern District of New York.
Law and order, yeah.
Right, he's law and order unless he's not. So what you realize is, they're now completely just a subsidiary of the Trump organization. And there is no principle but power. That's just clear. I mean, they can talk about, we're for the Constitution, except maybe right of assembly. Yeah, that part, I don't know. And, it's all nonsense now. But at least we know who they are.
Right.
But what they do so effectively is they provide the infrastructure for that propaganda. And they do it really, really well. Now, I'm not saying take that bait and react to that with the opposite. Well, we'll do the same, but for the left. I don't think that's what's needed.
Right.
What's needed is a Fox News for clarity and integrity with the same, kind of the same energy and weight and effort behind it. I think we're building the wrong thing.
I agree. Well, that is a very good mission, and I will say that when we started this, I took a lot of inspiration from you and what you guys did in the Daily Show. So I appreciate that.
I didn't
Thank
mean
you.
to.
Thank you for coming by, and everyone go watch Irresistible. It is out June 26th, both on demand and in some theaters. So thanks for stopping by.
Much appreciated. Good luck to you guys.